All right, let's get going today. We're going to talk about Marxism today. Marxism. I like this picture because it describes, Marxism and Lenin and Marx. So these are stamps of Lenin and Marx from Russia, except it's Groucho Marx and John Lennon instead of Karl and Vladimir. It's Groucho and John. Well, anyway. Now, we need to understand Marxism because we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution. We've been talking about how things are changing in the 1800s, in the 19th century. And one of the thinkers of that time is a guy by the name of Karl Marx, not Groucho. By the way, you should become familiar with the Marx Brothers if you aren't. Groucho? Anybody know? Harpo? Chico? The often forgotten Zeppo. So you should probably they're on Netflix or something. You should Google some of the old Marx Brothers films. They are interesting. Very interesting, and I like them a lot. I think they're classics. And Karl was not one of those Marx Brothers. Okay. Anyway, the idea that develops, of course, is that we have. Remember Adam Smith talking about the wealth of the nations. We see the development of business and capitalism, right? Karl Marx is going to be developing his ideas at the same time as we see the growth of this. And what does Karl Marx say? Karl Marx reduces, he's a reductionist, I guess you might say, but Karl Marx will say that everything is based upon the economic system. Everything is based upon the economy. That's the way he looks at everything. It's what drives history, what drives culture. It's what drives all of our action and our laws. In fact, he will say that the economic system develops the superstructure, these are his terminologies, the superstructure of society. So what do we mean? Well, the laws, the politics, the religion, everything is built upon the foundation of your economic system. That's the way Karl Marx sees it. Now, by the way, Karl Marx was also an atheist. He didn't start off as an atheist, but, well, I don't think he did. He comes from a Jewish background. He's Jewish. His father converts to Christianity. Why? Well, I guess according to Karl, to get more business. He was in business, and he thought if he was a Christian, he would get more business than being a Jew. So he converted. Now, I don't know if that was his fathers would agree, but that was Karl Marx's take on it. And Karl Marx will definitely have become, I don't know what he was earlier, but he definitely becomes an atheist. Because Marxism is an atheist philosophy, an atheist point of view. Now, Karl Marx will say that class conflict, that is conflict between different classes, economic classes, what we often would call, I don't know, we usually don't call anybody poor. I don't know, I guess we still use that term, poor. Lower class, we don't like to use that either. Middle class we use. Upper class we use, all right? But the poorest people, I don't know what we call that today, what's politically correct, if it's poor or lower class or economically challenged, I don't know. But at any rate, he saw that the society was stratified by their wealth. And that was all based upon an economic system. Now, of course, the prevalent economic system in Europe at this time, and really across much of the world, was capitalism. In fact, even the word capitalism, Karl Marx kind of develops that as a pejorative thing to call free enterprise business. Okay? But that's just what the name that stuck. So we still call it capitalism, even though capitalism has originally had a negative connotation. With some people today, it still does. He, that is Karl Marx, based his ideas actually upon the teachings of Hegel. And maybe we'll come back and talk about that on another day. But Hegel was a German philosopher who believed that history moved. You know, when you think about history, we're studying history. You might think, well, what's history? If I ask you if that was one of the questions on the test and it was an essay, see, would you rather have an essay? I don't think you would. And I ask you, what is history? How would you answer it? Well, it'd be a variety of answers people might suggest. History certainly is talking about the past. Is it just past events? Anything that happened in the past, is that history? Some people say that. But what Hegel said is that history was a line. History was linear. You had a starting point, you had a goal and an ending point, and all the events of history move along that line. What causes that? What causes things to move? According to Hegel, it was conflict, and according to Hegel, it was warfare. So you'd have a war. So you'd have a powerful nation. Let's say France. We just talked about Napoleon, right? Napoleon and the French Revolution, and then Napoleon, and then they export the war, and they fight against the Austrians and the Prussians and the Russians, and okay, that moves things, history forward. Somebody like Napoleon is what Hegel would call a world historic individual who moves things forward. And really, things never go back again. I mean, the changes of the French Revolution and the war, the exporting of it, means that things changed all across Europe. And then they just keep changing. So that's what Hegel is talking about. Things move along in a line from a starting point to an end. And there is an end because Hegel believed in God, and he believed that God had set all these things into motion. Right? And in the end, we would achieve what God wanted us to achieve. But moving along like that, he called it the dialectic. So, Karl Marx is going to take Hegel's ideas, he's going to remove God from the picture, and he's going to make it materialistic. There's nothing spiritual, there's nothing divine. So for him, the dialectic moves forward with conflict, but it's not warfare, it's class conflict. The ones who have the money and the ones that don't have the money are in conflict with one another, and various things are going to happen. Ultimately, Karl Marx will say there's going to be a revolution, and there's going to be an overthrow of the government, an overthrow of the system. He will say, workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. He's saying basically all the workers are enslaved, and the people who employ you or whatever, who have the business, are your masters or whatever. And so what you need to do is overthrow them, basically take over it. And he wanted to get rid of all private property. He wanted to get rid of all governments. He wanted to have a one world government. Well, this is the kind of stuff Karl Marx is teaching. But at the heart of it, it's dialectic materialism. What is that? Dialectic materialism says that the world is just made up of matter. There is no spiritual part to people or the world. It's just the physical. And there's no God. So this is going to really affect how he looks at the world and how he thinks the world should go. Well, I slaved hours to create for you an elaborate graphic on PowerPoint. Well, you'll see it in a minute. Yeah. I can't put it all up there at once. It would overwhelm you. So here we go. Are you ready? Huh? Looks just like a box, right? But no, that's the foundation of the superstructure of society. Economics. What are we going to build on this foundation, according to Karl? We're going to build all of the things that make up society, like law, like politics, and religion. So what he's saying is your economic system forms the foundation upon which the pillars of your society, the pillars will be formed. So what's he really saying? The laws that you have are laws that are built upon your economic system. For example, you probably think maybe a pretty good law is you shouldn't steal. Right? Stealing is wrong. And so we have all kinds of laws about that, don't we? Shoplifting, from shoplifting to stealing cars to robbing banks, to pulling a gun on somebody in a parking lot. All of that's wrong. Why? Right? Because stealing is wrong. But Karl Marx will say, well, why is stealing wrong? Stealing only happens because people believe they have their own stuff. They have private property. I have my stuff. You have your stuff. You don't mess with my stuff, and I shouldn't mess with your stuff, right? So if I've got a car or whatever I have, I shouldn't, when I go out to the parking lot, I'm expecting it to be there. If somebody knocks the window out and drives it away, I'm going to call the police. Why? Because that's my car. Karl Marx says that is where the problem lies. Of course, he's going to say there is no private property. Nobody owns anything. That's a whole different way of thinking about stuff, right? So he's saying that the laws of our society are based upon our economic system, and you have to have private property for capitalism to work. For people to have something to go out and buy, you have to have money, you have to have private property. What about politics? Well, you want politicians and a political system that's going to also reinforce capitalism, or whatever the economic system is, and even religion. You might argue, for example, well, stealing is wrong because the Bible tells you not to steal. It's morally wrong, religiously wrong to steal. Karl Marx is going to say religion develops on the foundation of the economic system. So it's not as though the Bible is right, or he doesn't even believe God exists. So it wasn't that God said don't steal. People put those words in the mouth of a deity and then created the whole religion around it to reinforce the idea that stealing is wrong. I'm just giving you one example, right? All right, so let's finish our building. I know you're waiting to see it because it's very elaborate. Here you see. Look at that. And that creates our society. Okay? So, our society is based upon the pillars of things like law and politics and religion, and that's on the foundation of economics. Okay? But that means that if I want to change society, if I think something needs to change, what needs to happen? I have to destroy the entire building. I can't go in there and just adjust it. I got to destroy not only the entire building, I got to change the whole foundation. We got to tear it all down, rip it out, and start over. That's what's revolution. That's revolutionary. That's what Karl Marx believed in, believed would happen. Can I get you to take the earphone out back there, please? Thanks. So Karl Marx then is going to interpret history. He's going to say that all of it is class struggle. Class struggle. By the way, this stuff is it was kind of gone, right? There wasn't really much communism left in the world, except, I guess, communist China, although they had modified it a lot, and somewhat in Cuba, although that's also been modified a lot. But it's kind of making a resurgence now. We call it social democrats. Socialism is sort of based upon communism, to be quite honest with you. And it's resurging. A lot of people oppose that capitalism's bad, and that sort of thing. All right? So, I think this is important for today. But class struggle. So we need a revolution to overcome it. All right, let me give you an example from the past, because it's always easier to talk about the past and current day. Take, for example, during even the beginning of the French Revolution, the end of the medieval world and the beginning of this world. Let's just use that, because we just talked about it. There are the nobility who own the land, right? They're the feudal land owners. This goes all the way back to medieval times. And they own all of the land. And all the wealth, all the economy is the land. If you don't have land, you don't really have power, you don't really have wealth. At least not much. Land is where what it's all about. So, what happens though is, as we saw happening with the French Revolution, is that you have a middle class developing. The French call it the bourgeois. The bourgeoisie, right? They are coming into money. Why? Because they found a new way of making the money apart from land, and it's called business. They sell things, and they make money for selling things. All right? Now, sometimes they're manufacturing things, like a person is a goldsmith, a blacksmith, a baker, or whatever, and they get involved in money, and not only money, but trade. That is hauling goods from one place to another. So let's say I go out and I've got a vehicle, a wagon or whatever I have. I load up a bunch of bread that I buy at one price from a baker, and I go out to villages and I sell that bread at more than what I paid for it. We call that profit, right? And so therefore I make money even though I didn't make the bread. And even though I don't consume the bread, I'm just hauling, let's say, bread from one place to another, and by transferring it, there's an exchange of money, and I come out ahead. Right? At least that's the idea. Probably if I don't come out ahead, I probably don't do that again. That's my business advice. If you do it and you don't come out ahead, maybe you should stop doing that. Try something else, or do it in a different way. Anyway, there's our business course for today. Well, that gets challenged. Now, when that happens, that means there's going to be a power struggle between the nobility and the bourgeois, or the bourgeoisie. For example, we see this playing out in the English Civil War, according to Karl Marx, and in the French Revolution. He sees the French Revolution as a kind of based upon the economic system of the old medieval system, and is changing to capitalism, and the bourgeoisie is sort of pulling the strings. Well, there might be some truth to that. We also see lots of troubles in 1848. There are uprisings in 1848. So what Karl Marx then would do to understand history, and by the way, a bunch of historians who follow the teachings of Karl Marx, that are called Marxist historians, view everything in a Marxist lens, which means everything is class struggle and everything is based upon economic system. Now, I think there's something to be learned from the economic system, but I certainly wouldn't call myself a Marxist or a Marxist historian. I like how fast the hammer and the sickle spin. I think that's nice. I just thought I'd mention that. That's good. And by the way, it's down below here is a kind of an interesting sort of artwork with Carl's face there in the middle. All the workers around him, I guess. I don't know. All right, here's another amazing graphic that I know will shock you. So be careful. So we see this dialectic. How are things moving according to this Marxist view? Well, you have the bourgeoisie, all right? This is called the thesis. That's sort of the status quo. That's where we are. Capitalism, business, those people running that are the people in charge. Now, rising up against that, to counter that, will be the proletariat. These are the workers, to put it in simpler language. You got the people that sort of run the business, you know, the wealthy business owners, and then you got the workers. Because remember, during the Industrial Revolution, you get a whole lot of people working in factories. They're getting paid by the hour. They're not getting paid a lot, and they're working under dangerous conditions. This is the kind of stuff that Karl Marx is observing. And he says, well, there's a tension between those two. The factory owner and the factory worker. So, using the ideas of Hegelian thought, he labels that the thesis and the antithesis, or the antithesis, right? So, the two of them are going to have conflict according to Karl Marx. That conflict is going to result in a revolution. Because Karl Marx believes that capitalism is the final economic system. That we've gone all the way up through bartering and so forth, feudalism, and now we're up to capitalism, and capitalism is the final stage before we get rid of all economic systems, which of course he says is the goal. What does that mean? You get rid of money. You get rid of private possessions. You get rid of all of that, and you have a classless state, a utopian state, where nobody owns anything, and nobody is in need, nobody's in hunger, nobody has war. Why? Because people are only fighting because of money, basically, because of the economic system, according to Karl Marx. So this revolution then is going to bring about what Karl Marx says will be the ultimate goal, and that is a classless state. Now, I can see by the look on some of your faces that you seem to be skeptical. What are you talking about, a classless state? What are you talking about, no money? What are you talking about, no private property? Well, obviously you've been enculturated, you've been indoctrinated in capitalism. So what we may have to do to make sure that you can enter that classless state is we're going to have to re-educate you in this new way of thinking. It's not going to happen overnight. So basically, Karl Marx would say, well, yeah, to really get this, obviously it's such a radical difference that people have to be re-educated in this new way of thinking. And that may take a while. And for that to happen, we're probably going to have a very strong leader, a kind of dictator or whatever, a dictatorship for a while until everyone gets the new system, and then it'll all dissolve away into this beautiful classless state. Okay? All right. Well, obviously I'm not a Marxist, so I probably don't present it as fairly as I should, but this is the basic idea. The idea is, let's say, and I don't really know how this would work. I guess I think it won't work, but here's, for example, what would this mean? Well, I drove a vehicle here from my house, right? So I can work here. And then they actually pay me. That's the amazing thing. They haven't caught on yet, but they're paying me. And then I get back in my car and I go back home, right? And that's where I sleep and eat and so forth. And I do a lot of calling of Bright Space for hours at home and working on making tests and quizzes all come out right. And then I get up and do it again. Now, so when I leave here today and I get ready to drive home, if I go out there and my car's not there, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get very concerned, right? I'm being worried. See, did I remember where I parked it? Yeah, this is where I left it. It's not there. So I'll probably call the police and say, look, my car's been stolen. Now, that's because I believe that's my car. In a Marxist, classless state, I wouldn't have a car. I wouldn't have a home. Now, obviously, I got to sleep somewhere, and I need transportation somehow. Most people are going to need that. I won't get a paycheck because there's no money. But I don't need to buy anything because nothing costs anything. Everything's free. So how does it all happen? Well, this is the part where I'm kind of skeptical. I don't think anything would happen much. But the idea here is that, according to Karl Marx, each according to his ability and each according to his need. What's that little saying mean? Each according to his ability, each according to his need. So, if somebody is a good mechanic, he can fix things, machines, then that's what they do. If somebody is good at being like a doctor, why should a doctor get paid more than a mechanic? Well, according to Karl Marx, they shouldn't. Neither one should be paid anything. So, if you are good at, cutting somebody's heart out and putting a new one in, that should be any different than taking a carburetor out and putting another one in. Or whatever you're doing to the engine, right? So, you each have a need. Well, you're going to need some food, you're going to need a place to sleep. There are certain things that you're going to need transportation. All of that is going to be owned collectively, if you want to think of ownership. It all belongs to the state, and we are all the state. So what do I do when I left here? I would just go out there, and if there was a vehicle out there, it'd have the keys in it, I'd get in it, and I'd just drive it to where I needed to go. I'd leave the keys in it, and I'd get out. If somebody else came along, they'd get in and use it and drive it wherever they wanted to go. Now, I don't know who's going to put the gas in it. Of course, that's these practical things. I guess somebody sees, it's low on gas, so they just pull into a gas station and fill it up, and they don't pay any money for it. They just keep going. So practically, you can imagine a lot of problems that might arise, but this is the idea, that the gasoline, the vehicles, the buildings would all be owned by all of us. There is no private property, there's only public property. So everything belongs to the government. Okay? I guess, if you want to put it that way. And then we all just use, we just use what we need. I only take as much food as I need for today or whatever. I'm hungry, so I go have a sandwich, and that's it. And then when I need another one tomorrow or later today, I go get another one. If I get sick, well, I just go to the doctor. Doctor takes care of me. I need medicine, they just give me the medicine. Everything's free. Nothing costs anything. Now, and on the other side, whatever I am able to do, I do to help the collective society. So somebody might wonder if what I'm doing right now is actually worth a sandwich later on, right? Teaching people history. But at any rate, I would hope that would still be valued in this society, and I'd still have a job. I'd still have a way to help society. So it's a very different way of thinking, right? Very foreign to us. It's very hard for me to imagine this system and that it would actually ever work. Honestly, I don't think it has worked. I don't think it will work. Because I'm not a believer, right? Marxism is really like a religion, a godless religion. There's no deity involved, but it is a kind of religion in and of itself. Well, the idea here is that when this coming revolution, when it comes, and the classless state begins, there will be no private property. I won't have a house You won't have a house or a car or a computer or whatever. It'll all belong to all of us. But for a while, we're going to need a dictator of the proletariat to re-educate everybody in this system. And then, once that re-education has come, this final classless state can then take shape. So obviously, we're not going to be able to go overnight from our current system to this classless state. We're going to have a transition, and that is what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat, or the workers. But in the end, religion and state disappear. We have a classless society. We don't really have a government because governments are, we just have a one world classless state where everybody just uses what they need and everybody does according to their ability, and we all get along in peace and harmony. There's no war, there's no God, there's no state. Well, who would buy into this kind of thing? Well, a guy named John Lennon does. You've heard of John Lennon? You know who he is? He's one of the Beatles, right? You heard of the Beatles, right? Okay, good. Well, he wrote a little song that's basically an anthem for Marxism. What is his song that's an anthem for Marxism? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above, only sky. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. You might say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Right? A famous song. I imagine many of you have heard it, right? Have you heard it? Well, if not, Google Imagine by John Lennon, and you will probably recognize, you probably have heard it, even if you don't know what it is. But if you listen carefully to those words, it's pretty much Karl Marx's ideas here about a classless state coming. Of course, done in a very appealing way. This is an appealing way to get Marxism, is through this song, because it's a catchy song, and it's a beautiful melody and so forth. But if you listen to the words carefully, that's really what he's talking about: a one world government, no religion, no God, no countries, nothing to kill or die for. We're just all going to live in beautiful peace and harmony. Well, Marxism becomes very popular in the 19th century, and it continues to be popular in the 20th century, at least say up to about the mid-century or so. Why was it so popular? I like this little cartoon. Sometimes I kind of like little cartoons because they, in just one little panel, they kind of describe things, if you're looking at it right, thinking about it. There's a lot packed in there. Look at this guy. He's obviously a rich guy. He's got a huge library. Look at that. So it's just packed with books. And, he looks like he's, doesn't work too hard, right? He's a man of leisure. And he wants to read a book about Marx because he's interested in it. He thinks that's interesting, and that's a neat thing to read about. So he has his servant get on all fours so he can get up there and reach the book about Karl Marx, or Marxism, from the high shelf of his private library. Well, in fact, Marx, that says a lot. It's kind of humorous, but if you think about it, but it says a lot about Marxism, that Marxism did appeal, I think still does appeal, to intellectual elites who believe, they like it because it's a neat system. It's a neat system to solve all the world's problems in one package, right? You talk about poverty is a problem, you talk about sickness is a problem, warfare is a problem, weapons are a problem. Whatever the problem is, Marxism says they have the answer. A simple answer, just get rid of all those things and live in harmony. Well, it's kind of appealing. I mean, I suppose if you actually thought it would work, you could see the appeal. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we all lived in harmony? Wouldn't it be nice if we all just, I don't know, just had what we needed when we needed it and did what we could when we could, and everything just worked out, right? Well, I suppose that is part of the appeal, but it also appeals to the intellectuals because, you see, they think it's an idea that other people don't know about. It's an idea that other people, maybe they're not smart enough, maybe they're not intellectual enough to see the truth to this, and they're blinded, they're blinded by their tradition or whatever. Well, Marxism says you got a guaranteed victory. You follow this teaching, and he said, this revolution's coming. We can maybe help it along, but it's going to happen at some point anyway. The workers are going to come, and they're going to overthrow all the guys that own the factories, all the rich people, and, they're going to do it. It's going to happen. It's assured victory. So, in part, it appeals to the intellectual who likes it sort of theoretically. It's assured that it will that there will be victory, and also it appeals to those who are a little bit radical, right? This is definitely a radical system. Some people like to be radical. They like to do things that aren't. I'm sure here on our campus we don't have any people like that. Everybody here loves to follow the rules. They love to go with the crowd. They love to fit in and not make any waves. No? Maybe? Anyway, some people like being radical. And if you are, or if some people are, Marxism appeals, because what could be more radical than say we're going to throw out everything and it's all going to be redone. All the laws, all the religion, all the government, everything's out, man. And we're putting something new in. It's going to be beautiful. The other thing that appeals to some people is that it attacks traditional values and ideas. And for some people, they don't like anything that's traditional. Again, they want it all to be new or different or change. So here's a system that does that. We're going to change absolutely everything about our society, and we're going to start from the foundation up and just rip it all down and start all over. Like I said, the church, the state, the laws, the government, all that's going to go. All of that's going to be eliminated, and we're going to start something new. Also remember that Marxism is materialistic, that dialectic materialism means that everything is material. Nothing is spiritual. That appeals to some people, especially in the 19th and 20th century, as people begin to get possessions. People tend to like their possessions. They want them around. If I went through your dorm room and just started removing things, you might get upset. Maybe you like your laptop. Maybe you like your iPad. I'm sure you probably like your iPhone or your Android phone or whatever you have. Somebody want to take that away from you, that's probably get the biggest fight right away, huh? Don't you touch my phone. Or your clothes. Maybe it's your clothes. Or maybe it's your car. I mean, you make the list. Later on, it'd be a house. Vacations, swimming pool, whatever it is, you like your stuff. What I found, and I think this is interesting, people buy stuff. Sometimes you get a little buyer's remorse, but you don't want to admit it. So what you really like is you want to show it to your friends and have your friends say that it's nice or good, so that you feel better about the fact that you just, spent $500 on something or whatever it was. And maybe you're wondering, was that really worth it? Was that kind of dumb? And your friends say, oh, no, this is great. Oh, okay, good. I'm smart. I made the right decision. People don't like to, especially once they buy something, they don't like to think that they made a mistake. Salesmen have been using that, and they're going to continue to use that for a long time. They kind of talk you into it being a good deal, and once you get it, you're going to try to keep convincing yourself it was a good deal, because otherwise you realize you messed up. And people don't like to think that they've messed up. Well, maybe that's psychology, not history. I don't know. Another thing, of course, it appeals to the poor. It appeals to those at the bottom of society. Why? Because the people at the bottom of society have the least to lose by completely destroying society. They don't have anything anyway. The guy that's got a nice house and a nice car and a nice job and so on, not going to be as interested about ripping all that stuff up and starting a new thing than the guy that doesn't have any of that. Say, hey, let's go for it, man. It doesn't matter. I don't have anything now. What do I got to lose? You got nothing to lose. Got very little to lose. And so, it appeals to the elite intellectuals. It appeals to the poor. It appeals to those who like a guaranteed victory. It appeals to those who like radicalism. It appeals to those that don't like spiritual things but like material things. So there's a lot of appeal. And it grows in the 19th century as Karl Marx begins it, along with his friend Engels. Yes. And Marx and Engels will begin Marxism. And Marx is really credited with it, and then it grows from there. And eventually you have versions of it. Some would say, well, it's not real Marxism. Russia, the Soviet Union wasn't real Marxism. Maybe communist China is not real Marxism. Some would argue we've never had real Marxism. These communist nations aren't, they didn't do it right. Okay, well, whatever. And so we see it really growing. Now, I would say that it's failed in large measure. There are very few. There were a lot of communists. If you look on a map of, say, about 1950 or so, 50, 55, and look at how many communist states there were, communist countries, and then you look today, you're going to see that mostly communist states have fallen apart. The Soviet Union fell apart. All of the communist countries of Eastern Europe no longer there. A lot of the communist states in Africa and so forth. It's taken it on the chin. There are very few communist states left. You have China, which is communist, although kind of modified communism. And then you have Cuba, I guess, which again, economically hasn't been doing very well. Maybe it'll start doing better. And you're pretty hard pressed. There's not much else. A few other places you might point to. But what I'm saying is, over the past 60 years or so, communism has greatly declined. Why? Because Karl Marx's theories just didn't happen. He said it was inevitable it would happen. It hasn't happened. The workers of the world have not united and overthrown everything. They haven't done it. Are they going to do it? I don't think so. Because Karl Marx was living at the rise of the industrial world. He was living in the 1800s. He moved to England from Germany. He saw all the coal smoke, all the pollution. He saw all the massive urbanization that was taking place. He saw all the social problems that were there. He saw all the harsh working conditions that were there. He saw the long working hours. People during that period, that period of the industrialization, many of them were working. If you remember those laws that we went over kind of quickly at the end of last time, and we said they started to limit people to 12 hours a day, 10 hours a day. By the way, those people were working 6 days a week. There was no weekend. People would basically typically work 14-hour days, 6 days a week. The only day they got off was Sunday. So that means you'd go into work, let's say at 6 a.m., and you'd work till 8 p.m. And you go home, you get up in the morning, you do it again. You do it 6 days a week. And the conditions, you're not getting paid a lot, and the conditions that you have are kind of dangerous, depending on where you are. Can be very dangerous. And you have little recourse. Now, Karl Marx looked at that system, he said, that's not going to last. But there were some things that Karl Marx never anticipated. For example, after 1870, people's wages began to rise. He never thought they would. He never thought that their wages would rise. Another thing Karl Marx never anticipated was the beginning of unions, where workers could come together in a union, say all the, United Electrical Workers Union, or what, there's all kinds of Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or whatever it's called. Teamsters, guys loading and unloading things. That these workers could come together and then do collective bargaining. That's what it's called. Where it basically says, all of us are in this together. If we all went in together, if all the workers at a certain place went in together and said, look, we need to have a raise or we don't work. And of course, if we don't work, then the whole thing shuts down. No. Not only that, but unions and workers begin to form political parties. They get involved in politics. In a lot of these countries which have at least some form of democracy, you can now get involved in politics and bring your issues up that way. See? So, what that means is by the time you get to, towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, workers felt more in control than they would have at the beginning. And they weren't willing to risk it all. Now, let's say you're a factory worker, but you're making pretty good money. And you've got some pretty good benefits, and you get a vacation, and you've bought yourself a little house, and you've got a family, and somebody comes along and says, you know what I want you to do? I want you to chuck it all, forget it, and let's overthrow everything and upheaval. You might say, you know what? I don't want to do that. What's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my house? What's going to happen to my income? So, the bottom line is the workers of the world have not yet united. And you know when they could have really done that? Let's say World War I, World War II. The workers of the world did not unite to overthrow the governments, the governments of their countries. When push came to shove in World War I, the workers of the world did not unite, but they united behind their own countries and they fought one another. The Germans fought the British and the French and so forth. And there were a lot of workers in there. It wasn't that the workers were fighting the upper class, it's that the Germans were fighting the British, the Germans were fighting the French. And the workers joined that. So, it hasn't worked out the way he thought it would work. Another reason why is nationalism. Nationalism is growing in the 19th century. We'll talk about it more later, probably next week. But nationalism is the idea, and that's really what I'm talking about here in World War I, World War II, and so forth. The idea that I feel I have more in common, well, let's say for me, people in the United States than I have in common with people in China or India or Russia. That I feel that there's something about being an American, that I'm an American, you're an American, we're all Americans, and we are unique, and we have a bond that ties us together culturally, whatever it is. We all like Taco Tuesday. Well, I don't know. I like Taco Tuesday. Maybe you don't. We all like baseball or football or something. We have cultural things, music. We have cultural things that tie us together as Americans, let's say, or as French, or as Germans. And that bond becomes a bigger motivator than our class. Well, I'm a factory worker, so I should bond with factory workers around the world. You know, we don't usually see it that way. The other thing is, the guy that's pictured here, like I said, in World War I, workers chose to fight for their nation, not for their class. And the guy pictured here, you know who that guy is? His name is Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin was quite cruel. So if you take a look at the Soviet Union under Stalin, it's pretty hard to reconcile that with Karl Marx's idea of a utopia. You know, what did Stalin do? Whew. Wow. Stalin ended up killing a lot more people than Hitler. It's just the Germans kept better records than the Soviets. So we have a very precise number of people that Hitler killed. We don't have precise numbers about Stalin, but it was millions and millions of his own people. Sent them to Siberia, which is sort of like the exact opposite of Florida, right? Cold all the time, harsh place to live, and he would put them there in work camps called gulags. Anybody who crossed him, anybody who didn't agree, they would just disappear. These people would disappear in the middle of the night. You'd never see them again. Some of them were executed, some were sent off to work camps where most of them died or had a terrible life, and so on, right? He was a dictator in all the worst senses of that word. Yes?
What was the difference between his ideas and Marx's ideas?
The difference, well, he would say he's following Marx's ideas. I think a Marxist would say, well, Stalin has, the idea, remember we said there has to be sort of a dictatorship to re-educate people. So that part is there. But the difference would be, obviously, there is no utopia. If you gave anybody a choice during the Stalin years, you want to be in Soviet Union or you want to be somewhere else, no matter where that somewhere else is. A lot of people are going to say, I want out of here. All right? Send me anywhere. But get me out of here. Because it was just, for millions of people, it was a nightmare and a death sentence. Well, anyway, you can look it up and study him for yourself. I had one professor who tried to rehabilitate Stalin. He wrote a book and dissertation and stuff, trying to make, maybe Stalin wasn't as bad as we thought. We don't have accurate numbers. We say millions and millions, but how many millions? Let's look at the records. And yeah, they don't have as good a records, right? Let's say like Nazi Germany, but lots of people disappear. Lots of people, yeah. But of course, there were some people who were very loyal to Stalin, completely loyal to Stalin. People today, there are people who are very loyal to Hitler. People very loyal to Assad in Syria. He's a guy who's gassing villages in his country and so forth. So, well, anyway. Let's take a look a little bit at nationalism and maybe try to explain it in the time we have left. We've got a little bit of time left. Nationalism becomes a powerful force. And one of the things we're going to be talking about probably next week or the week after is colonialism and how European nations begin to spread across the world, taking their power and influence to places like Africa, India, China, South America to some extent. And we see this powerful force of nationalism, that people identify with their nation. This becomes a unifying factor for people. So, for example, in the United States, it's a unifying thing. In Great Britain, it's a unifying thing. But you know what? It's also unifying in places like India, or places that are being controlled by Europeans. So I want to give an example of that. The native people, say, of India become unified by this nationalism over the colonial powers. We see also that religion plays a part in this. Religion and nationalism. One of the things that is a sort of, I think, a kind of universal thing that we can learn about history, and I think I mentioned it in here before. If not, I will mention it now or again. And that is, my enemy's enemy is my friend. If you think about it, that principle comes up down through the ages, from ancient times to modern times. If you and I have a common enemy, it unifies us against that enemy. It doesn't mean that maybe we're going to stay unified when that enemy's gone. Because once that enemy's gone, we're going to realize that we don't have much else in common, let's say. But for now, so for example, if a colonial power, let's say, comes into India, it can unite Muslims and Hindus in the fact that they don't want the British there. And so they'll overlook the fact that we're not going to agree on what's going to happen once the British are gone, but we want the British gone. Once the British are gone, then we're probably going to have conflict between us. My enemy's enemy is my friend, even if I don't really agree with him on anything else. We can agree on this one thing. We don't like this. We don't like this country. We don't like this person. We don't like this policy. We agree on that, and we try to get rid of it. And when we get rid of it, then we're going to have to deal with what's between us. Now, here's a good example. I give this example. It's called the Sepoy Mutiny. It happens in the mid-19th century, 1857 to be exact. It brings together nationalism, religion, imperialism. All those things are brought together in this event. And I'll just try to briefly describe it in the time we have left. Basically, by this time, the British had come and they control India. Right? They have the East India Company and so forth. They are making money. Remember, we told you that the British need cotton. Their number one thing is making textiles, and they need cotton. And they're getting cotton from the southern part of the United States. They're getting cotton from Egypt, but they're getting a whole lot of cotton from India. Now, British being there, not everybody liked it. And so the British military shows up to keep law and order, to make sure all this stuff happens, all this business and trade and agriculture takes place. So, the British, since, it's just an island, and they're controlling places all around the world, you know what happens? They enlist people into their military who are local people. So when they're in India, they sign up people from India to be in the military under British rule. Right? So what happens in 1857 that leads to a mutiny of those soldiers? Well, it has to do with that gun up there at the top. That's an Enfield rifle musket. You probably don't know much about it. That's okay. But that word rifle musket means it's rifled. That is, the barrel has grooves in it. That's what rifle means, rifling. so that when the projectile, when the bullet comes out of the barrel, it's going to be spun, right? It's just like throwing a football. Let's say you throw a football. I just take a football and I go, whoop. It's not going to be very accurate. But if I take a football and I spin it, it's going to be faster, it's going to be straighter, I'm going to be able to control it better, right? Same way with a baseball, basketball, whatever you got. Putting a spin on it helps it, but you especially see it with a football, and that's shaped more like a bullet, right? You spin that thing, it's going to go farther. You get a guy that just goes up there and kind of throws it flat, football's not going to go very far. Probably couldn't pass it to you in the back row, and it'd be like, eh. But if I put a spin on it, boom, I can probably throw it to you pretty fast. Yeah, at least I used to. Anyway, so that's what a rifle is. Now a musket, what does that mean? That means you've got to load the gunpowder into it, into the end of the barrel. And then you ignite that, and then it forces the bullet out till it goes through the rifling. So the most important part about this is that it's a musket. Now this is sort of a higher tech musket. So I'm sure the British guy whoever decided that the British military are going to get these new rifles was probably pretty excited about it, thinking, hey, we're giving them some of the best equipment that's out there at our times. For this to work, it actually comes pre-measured gunpowder. So you don't have to measure it out anymore. Measure out a little thing, dump it in, do this, put a little stuff the stuff in. Faster. You bite, it's a little cartridge, you bite the cartridge, you pour the gunpowder, it's pre-measured right in there, right? You put your musket ball, you put your rifle, your bullet in there, tamp it down, fire. You can shoot a lot faster. And it's going to be accurate because it's rifle. So you think, okay. But the problem is that the native troops hired by the East India Company start to get really upset when these new guns are handed out and they're told they have to use them. It's the Enfield rifle muzzle loader. And it had paper cartridges. And you don't want your gunpowder to get moist. You know, India is kind of a moist place, kind of like Florida. So if you just put gunpowder in a paper thing and do it, it's going to get moisture and it's not going to work. But when they were biting that off and they could kind of taste there was something on it, it actually had fat on it, animal fat, to keep the moisture out. This was the problem. Because Hindus don't want to eat cow. Muslims don't want to eat pork. What kind of fat is this? Well, we don't know. It's animal fat, right? So that's how they start to get upset. So when the troops bite off the end of the cartridge, especially for the Hindus, this violated eating. They said, you're making us eat animal flesh, animal fat. And then, of course, for Muslims, they said, well, we don't want to eat pork. Now here's a little cartoon that shows the British governor patronizing the sepoy soldiers. And notice in the cartoon they have the soldier being sort of like a little kid. And the governor's sort of patting him on the head saying, now, you know, it's just a little paper cartridge. Let's not make a big deal out of this. And I imagine this is what the British are thinking. Why is this a big deal? You bite the thing off, you put it in there, you throw it away. Boom, you're not eating anything. It's just a cartridge. And it's a much better gun than what you used to have. More efficient. Well, this leads then to protests, which eventually then lead to a mutiny of the soldiers who say, you know what, if you force us to use these guns, we're not going to do it. We're not going to use them. Why? It goes against our religion, but there's also underlying it, we don't really want the British here at all, right? It's a kind of nationalism. We are from India, you are from not, and you're telling us to do this, plus there's the religious factor in there, okay? All right, final screen. Well, the British are outnumbered, you know. They're outnumbered around the world because they're going all over the world. So they decide that they're going to put down this rebellion, so they turn to other minorities. You see, the Hindus are the majority, and there's quite a few Muslims, so they turn to a minority called the Sikhs, and the Gurkhas. These minorities become very loyal to the British because they really don't have much clout in society, and so they help them put down this rebellion. But this just points out the complex nature of imperialism, the complex nature of nationalism. Do you see this picture here? This is a very sad picture if you know what's going on here. Eventually the British take the rebellious soldiers. They strap them to the front of a cannon. You see this? They put a tie, like a railroad tie, behind them, and they tie their arms to it, and then they tie them to the front of a cannon, and then they fire the cannon. That's overkill. It's like blows the guys up when that cannonball comes out of there, and then look at it, they got them lined up, scores of them, in a ceremonial execution to send a message: you don't rebel against the British. All right.